Well, our education system and society in general has, for decades, been obsessed with casting dark shadows over our history, focusing on the evils perpetrated in the name of Western civilization, but none of the good things. Things like, the fairest judicial system in history, respect for individuality and property rights, the arts, the joys of sport, free speech, and, not least, a relatively civil political system. Instead, our kids are taught that we have caused nothing but genocide and misery. This, of course, gives woke people a fleeting feeling of moral vanity that until recently was felt only by people who made positive contributions to society. The most egregious victim of this has been the Catholic Church, which has been vilified mercilessly for its ill deeds while receiving no credit for its good ones. Sadly, this is as likely to come from within the Church as it is from its legions of impassioned critics these days. Visiting Australia in 2008, Pope Benedict said, quote, "I wish to thank the Aboriginal elders who welcomed me. I am deeply moved to stand on your land, knowing the suffering and injustices it has borne, but aware too of the healing and hope that are now at work, rightly bringing pride to all Australian citizens," unquote. My next guest has recently written about this topic in The Spectator Australia. Rocco Loiacono, welcome back to the show.
Good evening, Fred. Good to be with you.
Rocco, Pope Benedict said the healing had brought pride to Australians. Isn't pride a sin?
Yes, excessive pride in terms of selfishness and exalting oneself above others. Yes, that's definitely a sin. And as we see with this woke culture, in terms of virtue signalling, exalting oneself to show what they are potentially doing while not actually doing anything. Look at me, how good I am. I'm apologising. I'm welcoming these people, but you're not actually doing anything practical to solve the real problems that beset people.
Well, he seems also to be ignoring whatever good was done in the name of the Catholic Church, and there's a lot of it, isn't there?
Yes, and that was seen particularly with Benedict's successor, Pope Francis, in Canada recently, when he went on a very long apology for everything that the Church had done to its to the Indigenous peoples of Canada, saying that everything was done with the prism within the prism of colonisation. Well, that ignores the martyrs, many of whom were from Pope Francis' own order, the Jesuits, who ministered to the Canadian Indigenous people, who took on their food and ministered to them in terms of bringing them education and healthcare. And this week we celebrate in the Catholic Church, there's a feast of another Jesuit, St. Peter Claver, who ministered in Colombia to the slaves, which now Colombia at the time was a huge transit port for black slaves. And he then in the early 17th century fought tirelessly to minister to them, to bring them food, to bring them comfort, and also campaign for the ending of the slave trade. Now, all these things are forgotten. And many of these Jesuits were martyred for their faith and suffered terrible torture at the hands of the Indians. But of course, all that was completely ignored in the Pope's speech.